guests for, I'm just going to introduce them once they get up here. So come on up, John, Forrest, Nick, come on up. Come on, guys, straight up. So thanks guys for being here, appreciate it. If there's one thing we want to do is give everybody an idea of what your companies do. So I'll just start with Forrest. Why don't you start off and take it away?
Great to be here. PIXVANA, we're based in Fremont, 23 people, 3.5 years, building a VR presentation platform for video. So as we go through this tonight, you'll get a feel. When we think about extended reality is what we call XR, which is a mixture of AR, VR, MR. We can talk about that at length. There's really two canonical media types going on. One is like images, think movies and still JPEG type photography. And the other is computer graphics, think game engines, things that are rendered by a computer. So PIXVANA is very focused on gathering together photographed elements, stills or video, and turning those into experiences within the headset. That's how I describe it, a little bit tech geeky. Imagine putting on a headset and being transported somewhere and experiencing another place, another location, other people, all of which were photographed, not rendered by a computer.
Let's go. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm from Against Gravity, and we work on an app called Rec Room. Rec Room is a combination of a social app and a game. And what Rec Room is basically a collection of over 1 million different rooms where you can go and explore with your friends. Each room is a different experience. There are rooms that are escape rooms, there are rooms that are theaters, shooters, baseball games, just kind of anything you can imagine, there's a room for this. And all of these rooms are built by users inside of the app. Rec Room is currently available on all of the high-end VR headsets. It's also available on consoles and PC as well. Before doing this, I worked at Microsoft for 8 years, where I spent 4 years working on HoloLens and then 4 years working on Xbox.
Hello, I'm John SanGiovanni, co-founder and CEO of Visual Vocal. So we like to describe ourselves as the Google Docs of AR and VR, an extremely lightweight, cloud-based, multi-user framework that's really focused on productivity in the enterprise. So if you think about the current pain points of a large billion-dollar construction company with multinational stakeholders, it's pretty straightforward. People need to be able to communicate around immersive spaces, and so the way we'd like to describe our value proposition is we sell superpowers. So we sell teleportation, the ability to be able to quickly capture a sort of spherical image of a job site and then teleport a remote expert in using mobile VR to be able to be standing there, observe insights, do annotations and markup. Another one is time travel, so being able to do multiple spherical captures over time on a job site so that you can later peel back the walls and see where the pipes are, or to do facilities documentation. And then we also have a technology we call Mind Merge, which is inspired by the Vulcan Mind Meld, where we can get really up to 100 people all into a VR experience together at the same time, all on mobile, all over cellular, internationally, so that you can rapidly be able to have shared annotation and markup. And we're, again, really focused predominantly on the AEC vertical, architecture, engineering, construction, but we imagine a future of aerospace and automotive and even clinical communication with this tech.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we have a bunch of questions. Some of these actually from the audience sent me these. So let's start off with Nick. What do you think? What do you think Seattle has versus other cities that gives us an advantage in VR or AR? Is this a better place to start a VR company?
I would say one of the biggest advantages that Seattle has over a lot of other spaces is a huge amount of gaming talent. So regardless of what you're building in AR or VR, you're probably using a conventional game engine. You're probably using Unity or Unreal. And that talent's really concentrated here, and that's because of Valve, which is over in Bellevue. It's because of Microsoft and Xbox, and then Nintendo also has a game studio here. In addition to that, there's a huge number of indie game devs as well, and that talent's really, really useful in the AR and VR space because you're just using the same tools and the same pipeline.
Yeah. Any opinions on that, guys?
Maybe just mention Google and Oculus have.
Yeah, Google and Oculus have definitely moved a bunch of staff up here. Everybody's kind of starting satellite offices here, and there's definitely like a migration from San Fran up here as people look for cheaper housing.
Yeah. What disadvantages do you think? Do you think we have any disadvantages here in Seattle?
Let's see. I think, with something like AR and VR, you're definitely looking at how the ecosystem is developing, and a big part of any startup is being close with the partners that are really pushing the ecosystem forward. So the center of gravity for a lot of that is still in San Fran. I mean, that's where Google's headquartered, that's where Facebook and Oculus are headquartered. Again, they have big satellite offices up here, but that's definitely the center of gravity for some of those larger platform partners. So,
Can I take that?
yeah, go ahead.
So I agree with everything you said in terms of the superpowers of the region. I think there's a lot of game devs just in general, artists, geek hybrids here,
Sure.
and so I think there's wonderful things about the region. The one thing I would say is that my number one critique about Seattle entrepreneurs is that we celebrate the region so much that we sometimes forget that we really have got to get the hell out of the region in order to build a really powerful and scalable venture. So for the angel community here, I think is amazing, and obviously we have some awesome institutional investors. But you really have to be disciplined about spending time in the Valley, LA, New York, Boston, to really cultivate those institutional relationships for the large Series A rounds in other regions. So we've been pretty disciplined about making sure that the vast majority of our funding comes from outside the region, and I think that that's the one thing I would say. So for example, it's very cheap and very easy to do a day trip. So almost every Wednesday, up at 4 a.m. I'm in the Valley all day, and I'm back at dinner with my family at 6:30 p.m. And you have to really be disciplined about making sure that you are not staying provincial in this region.
Yeah. Forrest, you raised a bit of money. Are you agreeing with that, or?
Specifically talking about capital?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say yes.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add. This is not a big enough pond to play in for capital. Madrona and Vulcan are both investors in my current company, but also previous companies. So I've raised most of my money from Seattle, but you need to be down in San Francisco in particular. I'm from Palo Alto, went to Palo Alto High School, San Francisco native, still root for the 49ers, the Giants, and the Golden State Warriors. No offense to any Seahawks fans. So for me, it's very comfortable to go back down there. And even if it's not comfortable, I think the Valley in particular is part of any entrepreneurial journey, for capital, for customers, for innovation, for talent. But Seattle, within VR, AR, and the space we're talking about tonight, Seattle is a phenomenal ecosystem. It's not lacking in any way, shape, or form. It's certainly, you can do it here for sure. If we were talking about oil and gas or some other industry, financial services, you might be much better off in another city in the U.S., but Seattle, AR, VR, top shelf. There's nothing lacking. You can do it here.
Yeah. What is the best way to get in the industry from an entry-level standpoint?
Who in the audience has tried a VR headset of any kind? And how about?
Is there anyone that hasn't?
And how about AR? Who's not done an AR headset, like HoloLens or? Yeah, holding up your phone and calling that AR, we might disagree. In fact, John, I think we disagree, but I don't think that's AR. I think that's like 5-degree AR. Having it on your head gives you 50, 100 degrees. It's much more immersive. So that's ultimately when I'm thinking of XR, I'm thinking of something on your head. So most of you have seen it. I think that's a place to start, certainly to be familiar with it. I was talking to Peter in the audience earlier. He was new to the whole concept. That's a great place to start, is play with some of the apps, get a feel for the technology. I'll pass the mic.
I would just say dive right in. A lot of the tools are free, and I think the way that most of my team got started was just downloading Unity and then playing around with some sample scenes and trying to get it to compile for a headset. There's tons of tutorials online that can kind of walk you through line by line of code. You don't really need to know anything to get started, but I think that's always what a lot of us are looking for, is just like somebody that's going to take the initiative and go and try and get something compiled and then throw it up on GitHub.
And I think all three of us, and probably 90% of VR, AR startups use Unity. So Unity is a really key development platform.
Does college matter? Does college matter? No.
I tell my 18-year-old son it does.
Exactly. Well, I can understand that part, but does college matter? From you guys are standing a hiring standpoint, do Do you care if they're
It depends on the role. I mean, I think if we're, there's a continuum from super intense software engineering. We do a fair amount of kind of case-R research in the sense that we do want a PhD level kind of computer scientist that specializes in computer graphics, but I don't think we have any prejudice about like whether or not someone is degreed. But I would say that there's certainly certain roles in any tech venture where you really want to have kind of that uppercase E engineering background. I would just to accentuate, if you really are interested in this category, it seems fairly straightforward to say, but if you're really super interested in AR, VR, you really need to spend a lot of time in AR and VR, because the best way to learn about interaction methods and just track the space is to just have a lot of eyes-on time. And there's never been a better, easier, more accessible time to dip your toe into even 6DoF VR with the Oculus Quest coming out shortly, or even PlayStation VR, for buy a factory reconditioned PlayStation and a bunch of old PlayStation Move controllers, and you have spaghetti of wires, but like the price to presence ratio is rad. There's an incredible array of awesome titles where you can experience an incredible biodiversity of experimentation that people are doing in AR and VR, Rec Room being one of the best. So I think you just need to spend a lot of time in VR if you want to dip your toe into the space.
Forrest, question for you. Why did you pick your particular niche? Like, did it pick you, or did you pick it, or how'd that come from?
Yeah, that is kind of embarrassing, but I'll tell it as it is. So I professionally have pretty much done the same thing over and over and over again my whole life. And I kind of, I'm 48, so I've been doing this. This is my fourth startup. And basically, I built another company that builds tools for storytelling within emerging media. So I did that. I worked at Lucasfilm when I was younger, and we spun a company out that made visual effects tools. I then worked on Flash and Silverlight for a decade. My most recent company was a platform for hoteliers to tell a story about their hotel. It was more of a marketing system, but a lot of the same kind of modalities of gathering elements, creating interaction, presenting those in different media. With Boutique, my last company, was about mobile phone optimization because that was new, so helping hotels to present well on mobile phones. So in some ways, all I did here is do the same thing again with VR. And it's a little bit humbling. Like, a part of me wishes that I had the intellect to come up with a new idea of some sort. And I'm not being facetious, I really mean that. Like, a part of me is like, really, I'm doing the same thing again? But it is a little bit how I see the world and how I see technology and what I think I know how to do from building a product. And I'm really proud of what we've built. We've built an amazing tool for creating and delivering experiences in VR, much like my startup in 1997 did for visual effects for film and television.
And so part of that is demonstrating the fact that you don't need to be an AR, because you're not an AR VR geek by any stretch.
Yeah, I mean, little aside, I actually I haven't interviewed for a job in 20 years other than Microsoft in 2003, but except for I went and interviewed at Facebook for a job, and right before starting PIXVANA. And it was mostly because I was about to start PIXVANA, and I thought, Facebook's a big company, it's important, I can meet some people, I'll go and interview. And I interviewed horribly. I was, 3 and done, out the door kind of interview loop. And reflecting back on that interview loop, I hadn't even tried the DK1, which is the Oculus developer kit. I kind of showed up, with a lot of potential context for being, insightful and knowledgeable, but I really had zero experience. Back to the point we just made, the best entrepreneurs in AR, VR are the ones that are going to spend some time playing with AR, VR, becoming familiar with the apps. So I make a point. Nick's company's product is called Rec Room, if we didn't make that clear. Has anyone played Rec Room? So Rec Room is one of the biggest hits, I think. I don't have the data, but it seems to be one of the biggest hits in VR. It's a consumer playground, and it's a great place to just waste away hours and hours interacting often.
Which all of us need to do.
Often with a lot of 14-year-olds, it seems, because the high-pitched voices of the players. But really fun, really interesting, and as he said, there's like a million different rooms, so there's all kinds of different kind of applications, all of which involve presence and interactivity and social. So it's a great place to go learn about the medium, and frankly, when I started PIXVANA, I hadn't done that. I had this hubris of like, I'll just do another one of these startups. So I've been doing that more and more, and I think all of us spend a lot of time in VR, and it's evolving rapidly. There's no expertise really yet. It's such a new medium.
Yeah, it's still Wild Wild West, right? Yeah. Nick, what has been the hardest part of getting through the first 12 months of your company?
I think the first 12 months for us, we really wanted to get an application out there quickly and start getting feedback on it. So we built a really rough version of Rec Room in about 90 days and then shipped it. But it was rough. Like, man, it was so buggy and so ugly and so terrible. And I think a huge part of it has been like, how do you manage an like, in-flight product that's not what you wish it was? I mean, right after we launched it, people were like, like, hey, it would be great if you fix this, or like, this is buggy. And we're like, we know, like, we're working on it. We're working really hard. But trying to make sure that the app is always like being updated and it's always better every time you log in, and not breaking a bunch of things, and fostering that community that's comfortable with a lot of bugs and a lot of churn. I think that's been probably the biggest challenge, is like how do you communicate to the community that you're like, hey, this isn't done, like it's not going to be done anytime soon, and we know there are problems, but like work with us. So we want you to like help suggest what the next thing is.
Yeah. John, what did you learn in the 12 months that you wouldn't repeat? The first 12 months of your company, sorry.
How much time do you have? So,
give us just one or two that you like, holy crap, I wouldn't do that again.
yeah, I would say, so I have a couple thoughts. And it's important, that's a great question, because I think in the culture of startups, one of the, Forrest created this VR guild where we all get a chance, sort of support group of 5, where we get to talk about, because the truth is that you learn way more from your scars than your muscles, and the nice thing is that you can learn a lot more you can learn from other people's scars as well, and so, I think the nice thing about the guild is it's been a very transparent, open, kind of ego-free conversation, but I'll respond to, so just some setup, there's been quite a metamorphosis in the way that ventures are funded and developed in the course of since I did my last venture about a decade ago, in the sense that now there's very specific kind of revenue gates and milestones around building a venture, sort of the Y Combinatorification of the valley, if you will, which is generally very, very healthy. However, it's also wired fundamentally around self-service, SaaS, web-based startups, relatively low barrier to entry, sprint to $1 million of annual recurring revenue, $0 of services. So that's generally pretty straightforward and incredibly healthy, which is awesome. But then you have frontier tech, which is this sort of generally moonshots, don't worry so much about revenue, build insane stuff. The challenge with enterprise AR VR is you really have to do the dance of both. You can't just sell into the innovation groups for low dollars, but you also are not going to be able to get rapidly to very high revenue numbers, just because in most cases we're the first AR VR platform anyone's bought in a large multinational enterprise. So I would say that the biggest mistake we made is that we actually built all the plumbing for being 100% self-service turnkey. We followed the playbook chapter and verse, and it took us an embarrassingly long time to realize that at this stage, counter to the current advice of the Valley, it was actually much better for us to do elephant hunting, to really go after these massive multinationals with a lot of economic potential, and that's a very different sales motion. Yeah. So I'll say, it's funny, we have this really rad self-service SaaS-based framework and some savvy about how to market that, but it's too early in AR VR. I don't know if you would agree, it's too early to do that self-service. So we had to really go back and fundamentally rethink our go-to-market in a way that was much more intentional, much more focused. We need to penetrate these 40 named companies, go. And we if I'm being honest, we probably lost 9 to 12 months doing the wrong thing.
Sure, yeah, we've all done.
Yeah.
Tell us the NBBJ partnership, how's that work?
Yeah, that's been, so most ventures, particularly in frontier tech, spend way too long before talking to real customers. Sure. I think in frontier tech, there's this, I really admire the 90 minutes, we're putting something out there, no matter what it is, that's can't be overstated how important that is. Oftentimes in frontier tech, people want to build this perfect crystalline structure before anybody sees it. That's the wrong strategy. But what we did was wacky, which is that Visual Vocal has a quite unique structure in the sense that we have 3 co-founders, myself, Sean B. House, who's our CTO co-founder, amazing brilliant technical engineering manager. And then the third founder is actually the partnership of NBBJ, the Fast Company #1.
So they're equity holders.
They're literally act as a founder. They're dilutable. They work exactly like a founder. We sit in their offices. Most beautiful offices I don't pay for.
No one knows who they are.
Oh, I'm sorry. NBBJ, Narry Bain, Brady Johansson. They're a massive architecture firm, offices all over the world, headquartered here. So that's a good point. So anyways, they really helped to guide our hand and set our expectations. And we said very clearly, you know that this thing that we built together, we're going to instantly turn around and sell to your biggest competitors. And they said, we think that's awesome. We think it supports the industry. And as a tremendous credit to some of their biggest competitors, like HOK, the buyer of whom is in the room, before he transitioned to his current role, like they said, look, it's great that you guys have built that thing. We want to layer our own technology on top of that. And so that was a really wonderful go-to-market for us and served us very, very well.
Yeah, that's great. Any of you guys can take this question. If I came to you for advice about starting a new company in VR, where would you say, let's start here?
Well, all of us got an early start, for better or for worse. I think the good news for you, if you were starting tomorrow, is it's not too late. In fact, it might be, as a cohort, the next 100 companies will probably be more successful than the previous 100 that started 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I think the three of us are all surviving and thriving, and pat on the back to all of us. But it's been hard. There's been a lot of companies that capitalized in such a way and went to market in such a way that they're not going to survive because they were too early. So I think the timing is great. If you're interested in the space and you have some entrepreneurial ideas, I would encourage. I think it's a great market. I think the timing is actually in some ways better, in that it's a little bit more sober of a view and how it's going to evolve. And I think there's a tremendous number of opportunities. I think the first decision you'd want to make is whether you're focusing on business applications or consumer. And this is consumer, business. So we're selling to businesses. I didn't mention I'm selling right now. We're focused on learning and development departments of large companies. So we're helping people with onboarding, training, emotional skills, soft skills, hard skills, geospatial skills. So lots of training is the application that we've landed on with our application. It took us some pivots to get there. To John's point, we launched a SaaS subscription product for kind of general creators, and it was just way too early. So some of those kind of scars that we have, you can learn from, not only from this conversation, but talking to us further and talking to others that have been through it. I think it's a great market, and it has tremendous potential in the next 5 to 10 years. Timing is good.
Yeah, timing's like people think you're too late, but it's absolutely not the case at all.
Yeah.
What are the most challenging things within your industry that you had to learn? Nick, why don't you take that? What are most challenging things within the VR industry that you had to learn that you didn't know? It was just like throwing the fire.
Oh man, so many things.
Probably everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest like realization that I had since starting the company was, when you start the company, you really think about like, here's the product that we're going to go build. It's all about the product. Like this is what we're going to build. This is the company. But really, what you're building is you're building the company that builds the product. You're building a mechanism that can collect feedback and act on it very quickly and can compound those learnings. And so I think shifting that mindset that it's not about the feature. It's about like how do we pull feedback out of users or look at data to make informed decisions about what's next for us, and how do we then pull myself out of that process? Like how do we train 30 people to do that, so that it's not going through me or going through another co-founder? How do you train people to kind of think about like, hey, we're building the machine that builds the product, not just the product?
Yeah.
I want to just add on to that. It was beautifully framed, and I think it's a very fundamental concept that is hard to grok until you walk the path. But I'd say that this insight that we live in such an idea-centric culture, and we love ideas, and ideas are amazing, and I'm, an idea guy, and of 20 patents and yet the idea is not the thing. The company and the culture and the consumer insights and the go-to-market and the sales motion and the esprit de corps of your tribe, and all that is the thing, right? Sometimes I say, somewhat crass, but like the relationship between an idea And a successful product in market with revenue is roughly equivalent to the relationship between having sex and sending that kid to college. Like, there's like, ideas are wonderful and fun and awesome, right? But there's like a lot of work on the way to actually having a product. And I think people fall in love with the idea without realizing that like the thing is you really want to foster this community and tribe that's capable to learn. So I would just say, ideas are rad. You need a great idea for a great company, but the reality is a great company is generally built off of many millions of great ideas and implementation ideas and go-to-market ideas. So I love ideas, but just make sure that you contextualize them.
Hey John, can I use that again?
Feel free.
That's unique. I like that. Have you used that before?
I have actually an SFW slide
That has that on it.
that has some icons. That,
Nice.
so.
Nice. That's really good there. Yeah, I just want to second the idea thing because that's what I do for a living is actually help people with ideas. But no one's idea is ever the product that ends. Airbnb's idea wasn't Airbnb. Uber's idea wasn't Uber. I mean, all these things never happened the way it did. Facebook's, none of these companies were ever the original idea.
Yeah.
Your idea, whatever it is, it's wrong. Just FYI. Whatever it's going to turn into is going to be what's right, and that's what you have to figure out, right? So,
Amen.
absolutely. So let's talk about that. Nick, where did your idea come from? Where did your idea come from for Rec Room?
Well, my background was I was working on Hololens and making video game demos for Hololens while it was while it was secret and unannounced, and that was originally I guess the vision for Hololens was more of a video game console, and then as we kind of miniaturized it and it was like, wow, this thing's gonna be really expensive, we started moving it more towards the enterprise space. That's kind of where HoloLens is now, and it was around that time that I left because I was really just interested in video games, and I saw that the Vive was starting to sell, the Oculus was starting to sell. I played some video games on both of those, and I was like, oh wow, these are really interesting. And really, the space that I was interested in was I kind of thought that gaming was going to start eating the social space. My theory was when AR and VR are everywhere, social probably doesn't look like a feed of videos and photos and text. It's probably a lot closer to something like this, where we're in the same room together and talking and interacting. And that was really a space that I wanted to explore, but kind of in the context of a game. I would say very little of the original idea is recognizable. If you go and look, it probably sounds somewhat like Rec Room, but really what I was thinking about originally was something that was way closer to we would create a framework that developers could use to build multiplayer games. It probably seemed a lot more like Steam or Photon or something like that, and we kind of realized we're a tiny company and no one's going to use our product, so maybe if we release a free game, then we can get some users, and it just kind of went from there.
Yeah, that's cool. How did you get your Oculus streaming partner? How did you get them as partners? Was that difficult?
I had just reached out to somebody there and was like, hey, I've worked on HoloLens, can you send me a dev kit? And they were like, no. And then I did the same thing at Microsoft. I was like, hey, I worked on HoloLens, can you send me a HoloLens dev kit? And they were also like, no. And so Valve was actually the one that sent us a headset. And once we had a headset, once we had it up and running on there, then Oculus was like, okay, yeah, here you go, no headset now.
Okay. What's the most challenging time period for you personally in the first 3 years? John, personally, what's the most challenging?
I mean, the first...
Because all you guys have been around more than 3 years.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, every phase comes with its challenges and celebrations, right? So it's a journey. I think generally you're pushing a boulder up a hill. So those first couple of getting to a minimum viable product, closing your first real commercial, legitimate commercial customer, closing your first big customer, these are all major milestones. I will say Forrest's insight about the timing is true in the sense that probably the next few companies might not have it quite as hard as the first wave of companies, just because there was a fair amount of uppercase S survival along the way in there, when it always takes longer than you think. It happened in mobile, it happened in AR, VR, where you just got to hold your breath sometimes. And this is another basic venture insight, is that I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who are brilliant and passionate, have way more intellectual horsepower than I have, and are super passionate and are brilliant leaders, and check these people who are absolutely wired. But the sad commentary is that like grit is probably the single most important characteristic for an entrepreneur. So I mean, because it hurts. I mean, there's a lot of pain along the journey, and that perseverance and consistency is the single most important thing by a mile. So I'd say in like years 1 and 2, it's a disproportionate amount of kind of pain. The pain to progress ratio is brutal, and you have to like just stay on target, keep the team energized, keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah.
And the capital journey has to support that even through those rough times. And so I would say cultivating a team who has grit. Another anecdote is super important to find co-founders. Find people who can share the load and who you really trust and who have a complementary skill set, because you might be predisposed to think that it complicates things, but playing well with others is the name of the game here. And finding your collaborative tribe is critical. So.
Yeah.
I had a question similar to what you were describing. All of you guys came from a background working in big companies, having your own startups. So it's not the first thing, it's not the first startup you're running. How did you cope with that challenge of keep pushing further while you don't really have to, because you already have the savings, you already have the experience and all the connections? Because it's not the first time, so you don't have to eat ramen and actually survive to make sure you go further. So how did you encourage yourself to keep going further every day while you don't really have to, in that way?
Did you guys hear that in the back? Yeah. Okay.
I ate more ramen than I'd like to.
I'm a Golden State Warriors fan, as I've mentioned. So LeBron James, I love to hate him, but it's hard not to admire him. I don't know if everyone follows him enough to know, but really just a genius of basketball, and he's on a losing team right now, the Lakers. And I just saw a thing this morning. He kind of fell last night, and they had it in slow motion. And that guy really cares about being good and delivering. And that's how I feel. Like if my business failed tomorrow, I wouldn't be destitute on the street. It's not a food thing. Like I'm not going to have food if my business fails. But and I'm no LeBron James. I'm not making that analogy. But I admire his commitment to excellence, and I think anyone that follows him and understands what he's about kind of can see that in him. Just a real commitment to excellence. And I'd like to think that everyone in the room has a commitment to excellence and is intentional about outcomes and making things happen. And if you're starting a business, it's because you want it to go somewhere and have some outcome. And sometimes that's financial reward, sometimes that's customer success, sometimes it's just cultural success. So kind of being able to recognize all the successes along the way and value all of them, and not just this monetary thing. That's not why I'm an entrepreneur. It's not about money per se. It's nice when that happens too. But I think for me, the hierarchy is doing well by the team, first and foremost, and culture is by far the most important thing that correlates to outcomes in startups, I believe. And then customers, you get really passionate about your customers, and I know that this guy sweats about his gamers, and he sweats, I had a problem installing one of his betas, and he was personally attending to me because I was a customer, I was a user. The way John talks about his users, it's fanatical, right? And then you also care about your investors as a third constituency, usually third, because if you take care of the team will take care of the customers. If that happens, the investors will be taken care of. So I think that most entrepreneurs, and probably everyone in the room that takes the time to come to a startup grind, it's that intentionality, that passion. And if you haven't seen LeBron James talk about basketball, you should. It's pretty impressive.
Forrest, got a question for you. How do you think the spin guide that you created will affect training and sales presentations for smaller companies? Or is it only going to affect larger companies? And you might need to kind of explain the spin guide.
Yeah, let's talk about AR/VR a little bit. I'm assuming not everyone is an expert and has the same kind of perception of what's coming with this. Imagine a world in the future, some number of years. It might be as little as 2 or 3. It might be as many as 100 years. But imagine the future where the thing that all of you have on you right now, your smartphone, is completely irrelevant, because why would you take this physical box out of your pocket and carry it around, and it generates heat, and you're anxious about the battery on it, all those things. Some of you are looking at your screens right now. Why would you have that thing if instead, those of you that have glasses are already wearing glasses? What if virtual screens could appear anywhere in the room? I could actually right now just go like this with my hand and a big screen appears and you can all see it and we can interact with and talk by using gestures and voice and it's just there. That's what extended reality promises, just this pervasive computing all around us, extended from the reality of the individual. That is undoubtedly, in my mind, the future of computing, right? And that includes voice and touch and gestures and all the other technologies that are coming. This idea that we'll have physical devices, whether that be a little phone or a laptop or a thing in our desktops, is insane because you can have a huge screen right there and I can type on a keyboard that doesn't exist here because my fingers can be tracked and I can speak to it. That's coming. And if you think it's coming in 2 years, then we should all get up and go write code and tackle that market because what an opportunity. If it's coming in 100 years, then maybe that's too far out. So I think when this is coming is critical to the business opportunities and the kind of applications we need to build and what the opportunities are. But it is coming, and I really believe that it is. And a lot of really important people in technology think it is. Whether it's 2 years or 100, I don't know. At this point, if I had to guess, I'd say meaningfully it's coming in 5 years. And I think Apple will introduce a product. And Apple will only introduce a product if Apple thinks they can sell 100 million units. Apple doesn't do a device that they're going to sell 10,000 of, right? Like Hololens will sell in the low hundreds of thousands at best. It's an amazing device, but it's that kind of strategy. That's how Microsoft does it. You know, if you think back to 2000, you know, Bill Gates was personally very passionate about tablet computing and had amazing tablet computing, and no one remembers that now because, you know, the heap of trash of history, it's like forgotten. Microsoft often is very good early, but doesn't come out with the bam, that form factor that blows people away. Apple is pretty good at that. So when Apple ships a device, is that 2021? Is it 2025? I don't know, but when they do, that will be kind of year zero for the mass consumer market, my opinion. Until then, we're looking at business applications. That's how I view the world. Meanwhile, you know, he has a very successful app with consumers, so this is debatable, but that's how I think John and I would think of the market opportunity.
I love the vision quest, and just to layer on, I agree with everything you said. I think about it in the context of sort of generations of iPhone, right? So superphones have been in the wild for a decade and change-ish. So, you know, how many of those will it take before immersive computing, the alphabet soup of AR, MR, XR, you know, pick your favorite, before that matures? It's my belief that, you know, all of VR, it's just a mode of a next generation AR HMD. I think that, you know, in the distant future, you won't choose an only VR HMD. You'll just have a device that has opacity.
HMD.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Head-mounted display. You'll just have, you know, you might choose to be at human scale in another place, or you might choose to overlay digital information over top of the real world, but those things are going to be organic, and we're already seeing that with our products. Sometimes it's used in situ, sometimes it's used remote. A lot of people, when they start to dip their toe into the pond of AR and VR, they have a couple of the following reactions. One that we get in the enterprise a lot is CBNU, cool but not useful, which I think is a fair assessment with most companies. You know, the sort of pass the headset pattern, which is, you know, you have a meeting and you have something that's immersive and you sort of pass the headset, which is super gross, but also not very productive. Or even in the consumer space, you say, that's cool, but I'm not a gamer, or that's kind of by geeks for geeks. The industrial design isn't appropriate to me. I'm not really self-conscious about wearing this thing on my face, and. But I think the way the four is characterized, like if you think about the players, they're investing literal billions into this category. Apple, I agree that Apple's probably in a lead position, given not just their sophistication around design. You know, they're not hiring all these fashion execs for watches, right? But it also their sophistication around silicon. And this is a silicon game in AR. So if you think about it like, oh, I'd never buy these goofy glasses, but think about it this way. Imagine you walk into the Apple store and you're already an Apple loyalist. Let's say you have an Apple Watch, you have an iPad, you have an iPhone, and you have an Apple TV, and you're just sort of all bought into their ecosystem, and they say, hey, we have these cool new contact lenses or glasses or whatever 12 years from now, one iPhone generation from now. And you say, well, I don't know why that's relevant, and you log in and you know, to your Apple ID, and you put these glasses on, these very sexy Apple branded glasses, and all of a sudden, oh, that's weird, the exact model of Apple Watch that I own but am not wearing right now appears to be on my wrist. That's pretty cool, right? And then, but you know, I wish I had my phone right now, and you push a magical button on the band, and then all of a sudden, it's the exact model of iPhone that you have hovering in your hand at 0 ounces. And you interact with it in exactly the same interaction method that you do with your phone, but actually you want to read a New York Times article, so you push a button on that thing, and now all of a sudden you have the exact model of iPad that you have, but it's impossibly large and also weighs 0 ounces, right? But then you want to share content with your friends, so you take that thing and throw it on a wall, and now you all experience together this shared screen that has all your Apple TV capability, and it's all just magically being projected directly into your retinas. That is the kind of future that we're tracking toward. But here's the thing. That goofy little charrette that I just walked through in 30 seconds is completely plagued by the intellectual baggage that we have because we spent the last 50 years computing in 2 dimensions. That scenario that sounds rad to us now is already completely obsolete. It's the equivalent of how the first movies just filmed people on stage because that was their media context, right? All that shit is about to explode, right? You get 3D for free. As hard as it is for me to explain to my 3-year or my 6-year-old that once upon a time you had to go into a phone in the room to make your phone call with a device plugged into the wall, she can't even grok that concept. It will be way harder for her to explain to her kids that once upon a time all of our digital information was presented to us, these silly rectangular slabs of glass and silicon. Like, that's going to be a complete anachronism. So it is difficult to overstate how transformative this revolution is. And I think that the next 10 years promise to be more dramatic than the last 10 years have been, and that's saying a lot.
Well said, John.
That's why we're toiling away for 100 hours a week.
Exactly. Forrest, what's been the most frustrating part of customer acquisition for your business?
The market. So I would, we built something really awesome, objectively awesome, that nobody needs yet, so to speak. So obviously there are some users and we have traction and we're serving customers and it's all groovy and it will be up and to the right, but we're ahead of the market. And specifically, you asked earlier, I didn't answer, both John and I have solved a problem related to if all of you suddenly had headsets and you put them on and John or I wanted to kind of cast an experience to you so that you could have an experience. We've both kind of tackled that from a slightly different perspective. My focus is on presenting you with video experiences. So I might say on my iPad, I could control your headsets and I could say, okay, now I'm going to show you this example. I'm going to show you this example. And we call that guiding, and we just introduced a product called Spin Guide that enables the facilitation like a shaman would taking you on an ayahuasca trip, if you get that reference, facilitating your experience in a headset without me having to go up to you and be next to you and kind of facilitate, oh, it's the button to the right, I can't see the button, it's very complicated. So this is a problem that we've seen in sharing XR content, is this idea of a facilitator and someone who's on the journey. And John's company does that in a slightly different way around groups, and they've got some cool tech that we'd like to implement as well around. You all bring your own device, and let me now invite you into the experience. In our case, it's a little bit more pre-set up for film festivals, corporate training centers, et cetera, where I would have these devices ready to go, and I'd be the guide and control them. And as you're in XR and VR, in this state of the industry, I can see what you're seeing. So I might look on my screen, and I have little readouts telling me what's going on, and I can kind of punch in and say, hey, Peter, I noticed that you're stuck on this, or you're not seeing this on this part of the screen. I can facilitate and guide a large room of people in XR. That is one of the problems as we came to market, that we realized, wow, this is actually there's a lot of friction in facilitating and guiding and helping, and there's a large group of people here. If we had brought 20 headsets and we're trying to help each of you to have an experience tonight, a year ago would have been very hard. Today, my software can do that, could facilitate that, it's more scalable. John's been doing this for years with his demos. In fact, every time I see him socially, he whips out a demo live in a loud restaurant. It's pretty impressive, because you can bring your own device in his case, so the phone becomes the VR device, and he has these little plastic inserts that we all put on our faces, and there we are live seeing a demo. Here it comes.
Here we go. Right there. John, asked about your industry, the construction architectural industry. Where do you think it's going to be 5 years? Do you think it's going to be 5 years from now? Is your product going to be accepted by most enterprises, or still fighting uphill a bit?
I don't know. It's a really good question. I mean, Contech is a very hot venture category right now. So, we started out, we think about our core use cases, I talked about them in the context of superpowers, but optioneering, which is just architectural, ABCD, cost trade-offs, decision-making, that's a very laborious task. So we do that really efficiently. And architects are some of our most amazing customers. But there's much more pain on the construction job site in terms of having to get somebody to a site to make a critical decision. And so I would say the timing is right in the sense that even in this very region, in the same way there's kind of a wealth of AR, VR talent, there's also a lot of contact ventures, and we all have our own kind of guild where we help support each other, but I do think that the timing for penetration into the construction vertical specifically is very, very good. But again, it's not going to be the small firms. It's going to be the large firms that really increases in productivity will move the needle materially. So in terms of, will 50% of all construction workers in 5 years be wearing an AR head-mounted display? I don't know, but I will say that in 5 years, I'll throw this out there, every job site in North America larger than $10 million of construction cost will have one AR capable, like wearable AR capable device on, and probably more like 5.
Yeah, so they can communicate to someone else not there.
So they can overlay digital information.
Yeah. Nick, the rec room has people interacting in real time, doing things that they want to, not because they are being rewarded to do something. What are you learning when it comes to these unintended actions?
Oh man.
So like they're doing things, obviously because it's your company, but to explain the question, they're doing activities that you're not actually gamifying, you're not asking them to do it, they're just doing them, like high fives or whatever. What?
Yeah, so Rec Room, it's just a place where people can hang out. And I think we're social creatures. Like, a form of torture is being alone, right? Like, we want to be around other people. And so that's just kind of what we're tapping into. We're like, hey, you can put on a headset and have an unlimited number of people come to your house and hang out with you. And, they can't beat you up and they can't take your stuff. The worst they can do is say mean things to you. But you can find an endless number of these people, and you can facilitate connections that wouldn't be possible with the limitations of geography. I think some of the interactions that we've seen in Rec Room were just not things that we intended. Probably one of the wildest ones that we've seen is two people met in Rec Room and kind of fell for each other's cartoony little avatars and started meeting up in there and going on dates and jumping around to different rooms, and they would just regularly go in there, and they decided to get married in the real world, and then they built a room for their wedding inside of Rec Room. So they had like a virtual cake, they had set up decorations, and they invited all of their virtual friends to their wedding. So they had 50 people from all over the world come to their wedding. Their officiant was in another state, but he was like showed up there and was like, all right, let's do the vows, we're doing this for real.
How old were they?
How old were they? They were in their 30s.
That's cool.
Yeah. Not 14.
No, just curious. I might be Tennessee or something.
I'm an introvert, legitimate introvert. I get very tired around large social gatherings like this. Like I'll go home tonight and cuddle in bed after being here talking to people. And and you're either an extrovert or an introvert. It's very interesting when I play Rec Room. I have a lot of social anxiety because there's a community there that, I'll put on the headset and I'll be like warming myself up to like go play a game of something, Frisbee golf, one of my favorites, and like these characters come up to me and they're real people, and it's just their little avatars and they don't look photoreal, but I know they're real people, and I get this weird anxiety around like, they're talking to me, and I don't want to make eye contact with the digital avatar. So it's really, the magic powers that I talk about as relates to storytelling are empathy and presence. And empathy is that you feel for other objects and people like this real human connection. It's surreal, and it doesn't take much. In Rec Room you have hand tracking and head gaze tracking. There's no eye tracking. There's no lip synchronization, and there's some, but it's it's kind of cartoonish. And yet it has a really strong sense of those being real people, much more so than many mediums, frankly, including like video conferencing. The video conferencing, when you think about video conferencing, you don't really make eye contact because the cameras aren't in the middle of the screen. So you're always kind of looking at your own video feed, in the upper right, or you're looking off camera. So you don't have a sense of like real presence and engagement with humans through the video conferencing we do with Blue Jeans and Zoom and all those technologies. In VR, like there's a human connection. It's really powerful. And then presence is a sense of place. And anytime you've been in VR, even on like a cheap little Samsung Gear, not quite a cardboard, but a Samsung Gear for sure, anything above that with 6DoF, where it's tracking your hands, when you take that headset off, like there's this weird moment of coming back. You know, it's almost like the most powerful moment is returning to reality, even from something that isn't, you know, super high resolution graphics or video. There's something really, really powerful about being teleported, as John described it. So those are the magic ingredients for me, and businesses that can find ways to apply presence and empathy are the businesses that thrive, and I think Rec Room does both, and shockingly so, the empathy thing. I mentioned 14-year-olds because often I perceive that I'm talking to a 14-year-old. I don't know how old they are. You know, the voices are sometimes sound like 14-year-olds, but that's part of my social anxiety is I'm playing games with 14-year-olds, and it feels wrong sometimes.
Anyone can take this one. What do you think is the best way to capture content that is then used in a VR experience? It's just a bit technical, but like the Google 180. I mean,
well, in my case, and it sounds like increasingly in John, so photography for 360 or 180, which is just the field of view, has gotten very, very cost affordable. So you can buy a $500 camera that'll do a 5.7K spherical image, which is good enough to get going. The professional cameras that do 8K and above can cost $3,000 to $5,000. So we could be recording this entire session. That camera there could be replaced with a $500-600 camera, and within, you know, it can be live streamed to Facebook, but you could also take that, add some interactivity, and publish that the next day using a system like mine. And it's very much affordable, technically viable, capable today. So building content using photography, very easy. In their cases, there's 3D models involved often, or game engines, which is a lot, I think, more complicated.
I'll take a slightly different approach to that question. I think because Rec Room is largely about hanging out with other people, in the same way that, you know, here we might want to capture a moment. You know, we might like pose with our phones and do a little selfie. So that's actually what we have in Rec Room. You can at any time spawn a little Polaroid camera and like take pictures of yourself, and then we have a website that you can share them to, and you just see like your social feed and any photos that have tagged you in them. You can just see your like little avatars hanging out and scrolling through. So that's kind of how we connect. You know, the content that's happening inside the headset with the real world is we let you take those pictures and then share them outside.
If the three of us met and tried to build a room using your app, how long would that take?
I mean, it depends on how complex it wants to be. Like you can build a room in Rec Room and publish it in under a couple minutes, basically. It's just how complex do you want to, you know, put stuff in there.
How much furniture do you want?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. John?
Two things. So one is one of the cool insights that we had early on and actually invested in with technology and intellectual property is this very powerful notion of talking while pointing. So it turns out that talking while pointing is like an insanely high bandwidth method of human communication. I'm just saying, like, that thing shouldn't be there, it should be over there, you know, or you put your conduit there, and usually there's more expletives, but like, you put your conduit there, it needs to be over there, you know, like, and that very simple, you know, that window, I mean, you can be very precise with talking while pointing synchronized on a coordinate system, and we even add in additional layers of being able to put in different, like having a capture overlaid with a model, or multiple captures across the axis of time, and synchronizing that with voice on the axis of time. And just that little, just like nailing that talking while pointing and getting it all tuned just right, that has like been incredibly powerful for us in terms of a medium for human communication.
How are you capturing content? How are you capturing this? What, are you using the Google 180?
This requires a prod. So we use many methods, but my favorite, this 5 minutes, which just shipped last week actually, if I can find it, is
The new Ryko camera?
actually it's the Views XR.
How much is it?
Of course I can't, it's somewhere embedded in my bag, but it actually is very cool. Hold on.
The one I like is the Ryko. I think it's $800.
Okay, this is going to be your new favorite.
We have one of those too.
Yeah, this is a spherical, 360 degree camera. Many of you have seen this. Each of these lenses capture one hemisphere, so together you get a good 360. These devices like this have been around for a while. This is about $500. But the rad thing about this guy specifically is you can choose to have a monoscopic 360 degree capture, or you can have a stereoscopic 100 degree capture like this. Ready? Wait for it. 3, 2, 1. So now, perfect interpupillary distance of average human. Now you can capture. Now the thing I actually always say 180 greater than 360 for our application, because the stuff back there is a parlor trick, and I'd rather have better depth of field, human scale depth of field facing in one direction. Also, it focuses the gaze of the conversation and the user. And lastly, the advantage of being able to do applications in AR, where you can actually snap into a captured photosphere, is really, having stereoscopic is really great.
And so we could, as Forrest pointed out, we could have a different camera streaming live. Tomorrow I could do some cool, wacky stuff to it and publish it in a VR format.
Using PIXVANA.
Yeah. Right, Forrest?
Yeah, or we could be in a physical construction site or a space that Visual Vocal is focused on and whip out our phones and be looking at that content dynamically with Visual Vocal's platform. In our case, I was telling Nick, we got here early, we were chatting, I've been trying to get a meeting with an important company here in Seattle, and I got a call yesterday from my facilitator. He's like, 4 p.m. tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not ready for that. I was expecting 6 weeks notice. So I went back to the office. I said, what can we do to blow their minds tomorrow? At 4 o'clock was the meeting today. It's since got postponed to next week, so we have more time. But basically last night we ran off, shot a bunch of stuff, got it working last night, and we were ready to like show off a very vertically focused demo for this particular customer, their needs, their scenario. So we're able to produce things that quickly and very high quality. You know, a camera like that it's great. I'm so glad it exists. But we're kind of like, you know, quality, pushing the envelope of quality and saturating the screen. So we tend to use a higher end system. But it's basically that, but with 8 cameras instead of 2. So you have 8 4K video cameras capturing the signal, including behind you. You can compute stereo from that because you can use algorithms to do stereo. And we can put you in this scenario, this location, just that easily. And I think it's very, very compelling.
Yeah, and how many cameras are there on the market right now that are,
Dozens.
say, affordable for, I say, at the SMB market? So, you know, sub $500 or $600-ish.
10-ish.
There's 10 cameras.
Yeah, which 5 are great, and 3 of which you can get at Best Buy now. Like, and some you have to do mail order, but a lot of them are at Best Buy.
Okay, that's amazing. Guys, feel free to ask questions when you're all the way back.
Yeah.
I'll repeat it.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I'll repeat it, so go ahead.
It can be argued that the use of AR in the professional sports arena has kind of become pretty pervasive, or is moving in that direction with a lot of people active in that space. Do you think that that the existing players have sucked all the energy and oxygen out of the room, or is that still a space where you guys would see a lot more innovation yet to happen, and should companies, startups be looking to invest in there?
So the question is, do you think there's an opportunity in the sports arena still available? I mean, there's obviously some going on there, but is there an opportunity there?
Yeah, I think you're talking about broadcast graphics in particular, so like the yellow line in football, or is that kind of what you're thinking of?
It would be either broadcast or it could be in venue.
Yeah, so I think absolutely not. I think 2 things. One, you know, that you know, I watched football before there was that yellow line on the 10-yard, you know, the 10-yard gain. Man, has that changed what it's like to watch football. I mean, it's tremendously different experience when you can see that yard line and they're not moving the flags. You know, in hockey, they've done things with the puck, and you know, basketball, statistical analysis, distribution of players. You know, I think there's tons of innovation in how sports teams kind of understand the game and do analysis and broadcast how the games are presented. But I think a bigger phenomena isn't that, it's esports and what sports means. And I think the way sports is evolving, I have teenage sons that play Dota and have been to some of the, who knows what Dota is in the room, Dota 2, international. So, you know, it's an international competition that Valve owns for this game, Dota 2, and the prize money for the championship is greater than any golf tournament in history, you know, more than the Masters or the Players' Championship, etc. And they have millions of online people watching that. And, you know, we were talking about Apex, this new game that just shipped that got to 25 million users in 2 weeks. And, you know, people watching other people play video games. I think sports is changing, and what competitive sports will be about will increasingly involve non-traditional athleticism. You know, things like chess and poker are already, I think, sports. But with video games and computer-assisted technology, I think sports will evolve. So I think there's a really rich space for businesses related to applying AR, VR to both traditional and new esports.
They're building an esports stadium dedicated to esports in Philadelphia. Dedicated to esports. They're building it from ground up. Yeah.
It's a big business.
Huge market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't the Seahawks Mopop thing powered by you? You should.
It is.
That's a really
So
cool.
has
immersive
anyone been to
sports
the
experience.
Mopop Museum, which is the former rock and roll museum? There's a thing called the Holodome that Vulcan put on. Anyone seen that? So we did a piece there. It's a 9.7K dome that has room for about 5 people to stand inside of it, and it's basically 3 4K projectors projecting onto the surface. And we did a piece on the Seahawks that, if you've seen it, that was our team produced that using our tech stack. And you basically are at the stadium on game day. You get to see the guys in the locker room. You get to see some of the planning at their camp. And it's really, really compelling. I've seen other sports on that thing that is not publicly available, including personally went down and we shot some of the Trailblazers game when Mr. Allen was still alive. Paul Allen is a wonderful person and great, captain of industry for the city and particularly the arts. So we actually had the camera right next to his seat. He was there that night and captured a bunch of gameplay, and I got to see it in the Holodome, and it was amazing to see courtside seats of a basketball game projected at 9.7K with great audio. I absolutely want that in my house. Like, that's how I want to enjoy sports with my friends and family. It's coming. Like, it's all coming. I don't know if it's 2 years or 100, but it's coming. And a little aside, Mr. Allen, I was told I wasn't there, but later came and was in the Holodome watching that footage, and he turned around and he saw himself seated in his owner box, and that's a really nice memory I'll always have of him. And Vulcan's one of my investors, but just a wonderful, you probably know this, the Cinerama is one of the best theaters in the world, and it's really a gift to the city from Mr. Allen and Vulcan.
Good, Tom.
The point you made about Apple entering the VR AR market made me think of that great scene in Back to the Future 2 where Doc is refueling the DeLorean with Mr. Fusion, putting garbage in there, and then that kind of reminded me of the way that fusion has been 50 years away from being viable for the last 60 or so years. I'm kind of curious what you think of as being sort of equivalent to the ignition point vis-a-vis fusion, where you need to get more energy out than you put in consistently, and what that might be with respect to AR, VR, if you have a sense, the sort of thing that would spur Apple to say, yes, we need to jump into this. Perhaps if you know, then.
Apple is jumping into this. I mean, that we know. The job postings of friends that work there, like, Apple's working on this. Will they ship a product? Will it sell 100 million units? We don't know yet. But that's not contentious. Apple has worked.
We just don't know when it's going to ship.
Yeah, and if it'll be 100 million. I mean, if they ship it, it will sell 100 million units. I would say that much. But I think a good question for there's nobody in the world that understands as much as an active community using VR. What are they doing? I'm curious, and I think it's to your question. What are some of the attributes of hyper-engaged users or Rec Room? Because what they're doing is probably the closest thing we have to knowing what people will do with VR.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably, like, in retrospect, you can see that ignition moment. Like, we probably all think about, like, oh, well, it was when the iPhone launched. That was when mobile took off. Like, I was like looking at mobile pretty in depth then, and everyone was like, the iPhone sold a handful of million units the first year. It's super expensive. Like, this is not going to be a thing. It was not the moment that shipped where it really took off. I think the moment where mobile really took off was actually the App Store. And what that signified was, okay, there's now an ecosystem that's self-reinforcing. So if we sell more phones, that means app makers can sell more apps to more people, which means they can make money, which means they can have larger teams and reinvest it over and over again. You kind of get this like virtuous cycle going. And so I think that was the moment where things clicked. People are already building that platform right now, and you're seeing at least some of the consumer companies starting to wean themselves off of venture capital. And it's basically due to the size of the VR market. It's like, hey, if the VR market was twice as big, you would have twice as many companies that could survive without injections of capital. And so I think that's kind of what it's going to be. Like, we're going to look back and we'll be like, oh, the Oculus Quest was the iPhone moment of VR. But I don't think it'll be that clarifying in the moment. I think a lot of times we remember history a little bit differently than it happened. I think the thing that that like I'm looking for is, I'm looking for not the iPhone of VR, I'm looking for like the BlackBerry of VR. If you remember like the BlackBerry, a bunch of people were like, well, my mom's never gonna use this, but like there were die-hard people that like could not live without,
Crackberry.
yeah, they
Crackberry,
couldn't live.
yeah.
And that's kind of what we're starting to see, is that there are users who are die-hard about it. They disproportionately are younger and have a lot of time. They're disproportionately in middle school from what I see. But I mean, hey, I think that's great. Like they're gonna grow into a market where this makes a lot of sense, and their buying power is only gonna grow.
Exactly.
I had one thing to add, just to take it from a slightly different perspective, which is the science, particularly around the scenario that we were talking about like what do AR futures look like and what does that trajectory look like? You know, it's the same thing. Retrospectively, you can plot that in the rearview mirror, and maybe sometimes we're objective and sometimes we're not about like the actual milestones that matter, but just to take it from the technical milestones. You know, you can look at like the Palm Pilot, the artist formerly known as Palm Pilot, the Palm, which was basically monochrome, resistive screen, custom input method called graffiti, like, you know, but the early like first little whiff of like there's something here, it's self-contained, it has an infinite battery life, yada. Then you step up to like the Windows phones, which were generally not awesome, but it had layered in media and, you know, sound and video, and then, you know, and then there's like a waypoint all the way up into iPhone and beyond, and then the software support with the iPhone, with the App Store. If you track that now, copy paste that into immersive computing. You know, the way I describe it is like HoloLens 1, 2.5 years ago, dev kit, pretty, you know, kind of sells the tech but not the dream. Like, if you put on a HoloLens, like, when you're looking at a digital thing on a table and it's pinned to the table and you're moving around and it's like inside out tracking the room at frame rate, you're like, this is amazing, and then you sneeze and the tiny field of view cuts below the thing and it disappears. It shatters the illusion, the sort of Disney illusion. And so that sells the tech but not the dream. You know, Magic Leap, although who knows if that company's gonna be around in a year because of a million reasons, you know, slightly lighter HMD, slightly better field of view, slightly better opacity, you know. Now it sells, I like to say it sells the dream but not the tech, because it wasn't a really particularly good platform, but it was like, it was good enough that like even now, the Magic Leap is one of my favorite demos for kids because it's just like they are just in there moving little digital action figures around all day because it's pretty engaging. HoloLens 2 is probably the single most impressive technical demo I've ever had. Field of view is as good as Magic Leap, but you know, the HMD is, you know, as good as Magic Leap, but with eyeglasses. It's the HMD is as light as Magic Leap, but Magic Leap actually also has this PC that you wear on your waist, and the HoloLens 2 includes it. And then HoloLens 2 has really exceptional hand tracking and eye tracking. I mean, the hand and gaze tracking is witchcraft. It's like very, very high quality. And voice. So, you know, I think HoloLens might actually be that pivotal point for enterprise. It's $3,500, so it's not probably the consumer first point, but it is magical enough, I think, to start to like capture the imagination that like this might be the BlackBerry moment, or this might be that initial step. Microsoft is not focused on consumers at all with this product. I think that's wise, but it's fun for me to kind of try to correlate these devices and these generations, and we'll all be wrong anyways, but it's fun.
Exactly, we'll all be wrong. Good.
I have a quick question for you guys. Can you contrast our domestic XR market with international markets? Can you tell us maybe what's hot overseas? Because we're not the only player in this game.
So I can tell you what at least our audience looks like. It's pretty North America focused. There's a pretty big contingent in the EU. So this is like at-home VR headsets, right? So there's a pretty big contingent in the EU. There's a pretty big contingent in North America. So China is a very separate market that does have a very interesting VR market, but it is more, I guess, what you would call location-based. There are more facilities at a mall or something like that you would go to, and you would pay, per minute to play some games. And that seems to be a little bit more pervasive in some Asian countries. Japan also sees this kind of phenomenon as well.
Korea too.
So we don't see as much at-home play in those countries. They seem to be more kind of like arcade-esque. I don't know exactly why that is, But I would say it's definitely, you definitely see like the largest contingent of at-home users in the US and Canada.
Yeah, the most impressive demo possible in VR, as I understand it, is these location-based experiences that you wear the PC on your back as a backpack, you have a helmet on. It's a little bit like an amusement park ride. You have like a briefing center, or you're showing some videos while you're waiting because you're in line for a long time. And then you go into a physical space that has physical walls that are modular, that get moved around, that are phone-based or otherwise pretty portable. And the virtual reality experience is mapped to that geometry of these movable walls. So what happens is when you're in the VR world, you're seeing things and you walk up and there may be a physical thing you're supposed to reach out and touch, and you reach out and you touch it and you're like, oh my God, I'm touching it. And it's because there's a plastic knob that you're supposed to grab, and it tracks to your virtual space. And they do these really nifty things in these environments where they have you, for example, walking in a circle, but you think you're walking in a straight line. It turns out our bodies can't really tell the difference. So you feel like you're traveling hundreds of meters, but when you went into the building, you saw that it was only as big as something a little bit bigger than this room. Or they put you on a surface that vibrates and you think you're going up and down an elevator. So you go into these experiences and you have a 10 or 15 minute experience, and you take off the helmet and you're like, oh my God, that was incredible. So that's like pushing the envelope of the most immersive, most transformative, and that is a location-based entertainment, LBE kind of business model. And a company, I thought those that all were played out. I can't imagine the economics make sense in terms of how many people you can get through in an hour and how the math works. But one of them just got funded, one that started in Hong Kong, got funded by Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the top venture firms, and they put in a lot of money. It was like $80 million like 3 months ago. So that's a thing. And if you've had a chance, who's been to one of those, The Void, or would you agree, Ron?
Absolutely.
Pretty impressive, right? That I saw at Oculus Connect, I think you were there, I don't think you were there this year. So Oculus's developer conference, they simulated that. They had on the right, they had The Void, which is this company that does this, and they have Star Wars licensing, and it's amazing, and that was sold out, so I couldn't get in. On the left, they had a tech demo using the Quest, this $399 headset, much simpler, much lower cost, and they had just configured this kind of tennis court-sized space, and they had put cardboard boxes with white and black tape on them to demark the kind of physical objects, and it was like a 3-on-3 team game of like tag. And it was pretty amazing for 3 times $399 per team, so $2,500 of hardware plus a space with some black and white masking tape, and like we were in the Wild West shooting at each other. So what you were saying about your child, I have teenage boys. I think Nick, who doesn't have kids yet, when he has his kids, they will grow up in a world where a play date, like instead of playing water balloons, they can like come over, put on these headsets, run around the house, and it can be transformed to a Star Wars movie set or something like that. So that's like VR pushed to the max, and that will someday be something we can just impromptu do here and run around Create 33, but think we're in an Indiana Jones movie.
We have one more question.
So Forrest, you were talking about like from a business standpoint how like critical your culture is. Can you talk about how you're working on building that, or your thoughts behind that?
And I'll be very vulnerable and transparent and tell you, because I've done this 4 times now, and still haven't figured out how to get it right, right out of the gates. It takes a lot of pivoting and adjustments. And I started this company with 4 co-founders, all of whom were white males in our late 40s or older. And, older white males are great people. There's nothing wrong with that inherently. But as we started to build the team, we realized that was leading to a certain kind of mindset about recruiting and our networks and a certain view of technology. And we just found out that this huge population of active users are 14-year-olds. Like, how do we relate? One of my co-founders has a grandson who's 14. That's the gap. So we've actually had to rebuild. We had like our little, acronym of the 5 top values, and we lived those, and we did awards and all the things, best practice that I'm sure you've heard about if you go to these kind of events. In fact, if you haven't, doing one of these just on culture, I think is the most important thing about startups. But what we had to do is we had to kind of like reset the culture and start over a bit, because we realized it turns out now I'm the CEO, 5 of my direct reports, all 5 of my direct reports are women, 2 of them are 20-year-olds. So we kind of like converted the culture to being led by a much more diverse group of people, and the values that we had set up as the 50-year-olds didn't translate as well. They didn't ring true. So as an example, one of our current values that we live every day is yes and we learned that in an improv class. And we found ourselves constantly referring back to the improv class and saying, well, yes, and, instead of no, but. And suddenly we realized, like, yeah, that's more about us and our culture than that thing that we wrote on the fridge, year zero. So we've kind of, there's no better evidence of how our values have evolved in that we literally unveiled our 2.0, values recently, and everyone knows what they are inherently, and we have fun playing with them and citing them and correcting each other on them because they're so real to all of us. They came from the current 23 employees, not the founder's values or something that came before.
One last question.
Actually, I'll just
Okay.
a point on culture. This is beautifully put, and Forrest's companies are notoriously awesome places to work. So I think you've actually been successful every time. But a couple of thoughts. So we've actually been also pretty disciplined about, we're at 50-50 gender balance now, which has been great and has had clear impact on product. But another thing I would say is a phrase that I hate is we work hard and we play hard, which basically means that like we have no life work balance, we just have to drink a lot. I think that's just it's just all wrong in terms of building a great culture. I think that it's every entrepreneur will tell you that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you have to be hypersensitive to burning out your team and your team's families. And so I think it's a delicate dance, right? Because there's a lot of shit to do, right? But I think that it's really important to be authentic about life-work balance. And I work a lot, but I'm super disciplined about not working much on the weekends. Making sure you foster a culture where people aren't always expected to leap when you have, making sure that people recognize that this is the long haul and that it's an amazing place to work. A phrase that I prefer way more than work hard and play hard, I actually learned when I was at Microsoft Research and we were funding the MIT Media Lab. And it was really cool because I was in the collaborative group called Things That Think that was funded by Microsoft and by Lego. And I learned a phrase from the Lego team, which was hard fun. They got it in their focus groups around Lego's programmable bricks that is this fun? And some kids said, it's fun, but it's hard fun, Yes, that's what an AR/VR startup is. It's hard fun, and it makes your brain hurt in awesome ways. And so I think that creating a culture of significant challenges, but also a place that's not an oppressive workload is actually really important. And then of course, mutual respect, suppressing ego, all the things that you would expect. But that's one anecdote that I share.
What's a cultural thing? Send us home, Mike.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I would say I think one of the mistakes that I see a lot of people that hear this kind of early on is, you're going to hear over and over again that culture is really important, and it is really important. I think what that means to a lot of people is we come up with a pithy little slogan and then put it on a poster and then we hang it on the walls and now we have culture. Your culture will not be born until you are making hard choices. Your culture is when your company is facing a decision point and 90% of cultures would have gone one way and you chose the 10% route, that's your culture. That's what's unique about you. So we care about integrity. No one's you know what? We don't care about integrity. If no one would say that does not describe our company, that's not a cultural thing. So I think a big part of what you should be focusing on with culture is how is that culture manifesting in the decision-making process, and not just are we putting up the posters around the office? Are we living this? Is it part of the way that we process user feedback? Is it part of the way that we hire people? Is it part of the way that we make promotion and performance decisions? Those are the important points. It doesn't need to be on a poster in your office. It needs to be in your actions every day.
Yeah, just one point on that. Culture doesn't happen without you working at it. It doesn't just appear. You have to work at it. You have to talk about it. You have to get mentors about it. You have to think about it like a product. It's no different. It's a piece that's almost tangible. Last question, I promise.
Okay, so the question is you're more or less consuming the hardware or the technology in terms of the basic technology for AR/VR, like Unity or the hardware of Oculus and other headsets. So what do you think is the biggest limitation that you have faced, either in terms of software or hardware or something that?
Technical limitation?
Technical,
Yeah, technical.
technical limitation.
Oh, man. Yeah, there's plenty of limitations that are not technical, and I would say the main one is probably install base.
Yeah.
Which is like how many headsets are there? So most of the and so like how does that funnel back to technical challenges? I mean, I think the biggest thing that we're trying to figure out is like how can we make these headsets cheaper and more accessible to people? Like if you can come down from $399 to $199, you could probably sell 10 times as many of these headsets. And so it's like what components inside of them are adding to the cost. So if you look at what Facebook is doing, if you look at what Microsoft I think is looking at as well, is like how can we just take the components that we have and make them cheaper and lighter and you know, something that you actually want to wear on your face and something that you can actually afford.
Yeah, for the designers in the room, the challenge is spherical immersive, you can't design on a 2D screen. You can try, but you'll like lay out a text or a button or say, oh, when you click on it, it'll do this. And then you see it in the headset and it's like totally different. You know, it's just, you really have to kind of be in VR, designing for VR, in my opinion. So we actually, as we were building the system, we were like gonna do it in a web browser because, oh, you know, it's easy, you can run it on an iPad. And then we started to see that everything we did, you would have to redo over and over again because when you got into the headset, it didn't work. So we kind of moved to headset first, headset only for a lot of our features. And that creates some friction because you have to put the headset on, but once you're in there and you play something, it's correct. And you can see it immediately as the user will see it. So that's been part of our design philosophy, is to be in headset as much as possible during design.
One quick technical note also is that, as you would imagine in any great AR, VR startup, that like I would say for us, this might or might not be the case for one or both of you, but the vast majority of really meaty kind of software engineering challenges have nothing to do with VR. You know, so it's like scalability, stability, you know, figuring out how to do multiplayer meetings if your cellular connection drops, how do you rehydrate the meeting, how do you know, like all this stuff that's not necessarily VR. You might be in the room and not know anything about Unity, but you're a rock star of cloud computing. There's a lot of AR, VR jobs where you can focus on exactly that thing, and that's the hardest, the media stuff that we tackle.
Yeah, it's always, not always, but
Often.
it'll be there for a while. First off, thank you guys for being here. Appreciate taking some time from the families and work and all the stuff that we do on a daily basis. So it was a great event, and thanks for just being honest and transparent and sharing what you've learned and the good, bad, and ugly. So thank you very much.